You're sitting at a grand medieval feast. Candles flicker, wine flows, and a roasted boar stares blankly across the table. The air smells like meat, sweat, and ambition. Goblets clash, dogs fight under the benches, and somewhere someone's about to lose a tooth to a chunk of bread harder than your countertop. But don't get too comfortable. You wouldn't be sitting with the nobles. You'd be outside, maybe catching crumbs through the open door, praying the wind doesn't carry the smell of roast goose your way. While the rich feasted on delicacies from across continents, the poor survived on pottage that looked and tasted like a medieval swamp. This was more than just food. It was a show of power, class, and divine right. So, tonight, we're going to pull up a seat next to the lords, the servants, and the beggars to see what medieval feasts were really like. Welcome to dinner, if you can stomach it. 1. When dinner was a power move. In the Middle Ages, a feast wasn't just about eating. It was performance art, a political theater disguised as dinner. You didn't just sit and chew, you announced your existence through food. Every dish, every goblet, every chew of roasted meat screamed one thing: I have more than you. Picture this. You walk into the great hall. Torches flicker. The ceiling disappears into smoke. The smell is overwhelming: roasted meat, burning fat, wine gone slightly sour. A bard sings your ancestors' heroic deeds, which, let's be honest, were probably just tax collection with extra steps. The lord of the manor sits at the head table, raised high above everyone else, literally on a platform so even his crumbs fall in the right direction. Before him, peacocks with feathers reattached after roasting, pies filled with live birds, gold leaf pastries, and wine spiced with cinnamon that traveled farther than most people ever would. And no, he's not sharing. Each guest's place at the table is a message. The closer you sit to the Lord, the more important you are. If you're at the far end, near the dogs, congratulations, you're human furniture. Feasts could last for hours, sometimes days. Dozens of courses came out in waves: soups, fish, meats, desserts, each one more absurdly rich than the last. The meal wasn't just to satisfy hunger, it was a public announcement of dominance. Even the church joined in. Priests blessed the food, reminding everyone that this mountain of meat was God-approved wealth, divine proof that the rich deserved to eat better than everyone else. Meanwhile, the peasants who harvested that food might catch a glimpse through the open door, just enough to smell what heaven might be like if heaven included roast swan and hypocrisy. Because in medieval Europe, a feast was never just dinner. It was propaganda with a side of gravy. And for every noble lifting his goblet, 100 hungry mouths stayed quiet in the fields outside. R. The poor man's menu, boiled misery. Now let's talk about what you'd actually be eating. Spoiler, it's not a roast peacock. You're a peasant. You've spent all day breaking your back in a muddy field for someone else's bread. When you finally get home, your feast is a bubbling pot of something called pottage. Sounds fancy, right? It's not. It's gray. It's lumpy. It's whatever grains, roots, and weeds you manage to scrounge up boiled together until it looks like a medieval smoothie bowl from hell. If you're lucky, there's a chunk of bacon in there from last year's slaughter. If not, you settle for flavoring it with onions, leeks, or maybe a pinch of salt if you can afford it. Your spoon? A piece of wood you've been using for a decade. Your plate? Half a bowl carved from a log. Your drink? Ale so weak you'd have to swim in it to get drunk. And bread, your loyal, miserable companion. It's dense, dark, and sour, rye or barley, sometimes mixed with acorn flour. If it's not moldy, that's a good day. Sometimes it's even crawling. You just pick the bugs out and keep eating. Protein's protein. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, it's the same meal day after day. Pottage and bread and pottage. Occasionally, some peas or beans if the harvest was kind. If not, grass soup. And here's the cruel irony. You grow the wheat, the livestock, the vegetables, but you don't own a single bite of it. The Lord takes the best. The church takes its tithe. You get the leftovers of your own labor. So while the rich are choking down swan pie and spiced wine, you're chewing on yesterday's turnips and hoping no one steals your only chicken. Still, there's one small advantage. You'll never die from overeating. The nobles can't say the same. Your stomach may be empty, but at least it's not about to explode. 3. Why even the bread wanted you dead. Let's say, by some miracle, you actually have bread. You'd think that's good news. It's not, because in the Middle Ages, Even your bread was trying to kill you. Grain was stored in wooden barns, damp, dark, and perfect for fungus. And that fungus, called ergot, wasn't just gross, it was lethal. Eat enough of it, and your body goes on a horrifying trip. Your fingers burn, your limbs twist. You see visions of fire and demons. Whole villages would start convulsing, screaming, or hallucinating. People thought it was witchcraft or divine punishment. In reality, it was bad bread. Imagine eating your daily loaf, then waking up convinced the devil's sitting on your chest. Congratulations, you've got ergotism, also known as Street Anthony's fire. It can make you go insane or just melt parts of your body. But even when it wasn't poisonous, bread was still cruel. Millstones shed fine grit into the flour, wearing down your teeth until you were basically gumming your meals by age 30. Bakers often mixed in filler chalk, sawdust, crushed beans, anything to stretch the dough. And if the Lord demanded his cut first, you might get the leftover flour, the damp, bug-ridden stuff swept off the floor. Every bite carried a risk: parasites, poison, or slow dental destruction. And because bread was sacred, literally blessed during church services, you couldn't waste it. You'd choke it down, no matter how bad it was, praying it didn't send you to meet your maker early. Bread was supposed to be life. In the Middle Ages, it was just another gamble. You could survive a war, a plague, even a famine, but one bad loaf, and dinner might come with a side of hallucinations and gangrene. So yes, while the nobles stuffed their faces with gilded pies, the peasants fought invisible killers hiding in their bread bins. And that's the real taste of medieval life: desperation with a hint of dirt. Veer. Feast like a king, D like one. Upstairs, far from the muddy courtyards and smoky kitchens, the air is thick with excess. The nobles have gathered, dressed in velvet and perfume, ready to do what they do best: eat themselves halfway to death. The tables groan under the weight of roasted meats. Pheasants with feathers reattached for style points. Swans baked into pies, gilded with real gold leaf. Fish hauled in from the coast days old, but who's counting? The scent is so heavy with fat and spice that it clings to your skin. You can almost feel your arteries closing just by breathing it in. For the rich, gluttony isn't shameful, it's status. Every extra course is a flex. Look at me, it says. I can afford to waste food while you're chewing bark. A thin noble is a suspicious one. Too little flesh suggests poverty, or worse, piety. And the drinks? Forget your glass of wine with dinner. These people bathed in it. The finest vintages were thickened with honey, cinnamon, and cloves from faraway lands, each sip worth more than a peasant's yearly rent. Then there were jellied meats, sugar sculptures, and pastries shaped like castles. Dinner wasn't a meal, it was a bragging contest in calories. But here's the problem with feasting like a god: your body still runs like a human's. The nobles suffered from gout, ulcers, kidney stones, and what medieval doctors called the fullness of the liver, a polite way of saying your insides are rebelling. Medical wisdom of the time didn't help much. Remedies included bloodletting, crushed emerald powder, or prayers to St. Lawrence, patron saint of cooks. Spoiler, none of it worked. Still, dying from indulgence was almost fashionable. It proved you had lived grandly enough to break yourself with luxury. After all, when your life's goal is to flaunt divine favor, what's one little organ failure if you looked magnificent doing it? And while the nobles gorged on roasted wealth, someone else was cleaning up the bones. 5. The servants' feast. Scraps and shame. Downstairs, it's a different kind of feast. The kind you build, but never taste. You're a servant in a noble house. You've spent hours running between the smoky kitchen and the great hall, balancing platters heavy enough to throw your back out before 20. The sweat burns your eyes. The smell of grease never leaves your clothes, and your stomach growls loud enough to get you whipped. While the lords laugh and eat upstairs, you're busy pouring their wine, cutting their meat, and pretending you don't see them toss half of it to the dogs. Every slice, every spill, every dropped bone reminds you that the closer you get to food, the less of it you're allowed to have. When the last course ends and the nobles drift off to sleep or to vomit, then your feast begins. Scraps, bits of crust, the bones with a few shreds left, maybe a slice of cheese if you're lucky and quick. The leftovers are distributed by rank, even among servants. The steward gets the good pieces. The scullery boys get whatever the rats missed. You sleep beside barrels, on cold floors that smell like ale and ash. The kitchens never stop. There's always dough to knead, pots to scrub, and fires to stoke. You might live on porridge and stale bread, yet handle spices worth their weight in gold. And heaven help you if you're caught sneaking a bite. That's theft, punishable by beating or worse, dismissal, which, in medieval terms, might as well be a death sentence. So, you keep your head down. You serve in silence. You scrape the platters clean, knowing those crumbs could feed your family for a week. Because in the great theater of medieval dining, you're not part of the story. You're the stagehand sweeping up the scene, hungry, invisible, and replaceable. But at least you're still alive. For now. 6. Table manners that could get you killed. If you think modern dinner parties are awkward, medieval ones could end in bloodshed, literally. In the Middle Ages, a feast wasn't just about food, it was a social battlefield, and your cutlery was both a utensil and a weapon. You didn't have your own plate. You shared a trencher, a slab of old bread with the person next to you. Eat too much of their side, and congratulations, you've just started a feud. Drinking etiquette was equally treacherous. You didn't sip whenever you wanted, you waited your turn. Grabbing the communal cup without permission was like publicly calling your neighbor a peasant. And in a room full of armed men, that's not the kind of mistake you make twice. Knives were everywhere. Everyone carried one. There were no forks yet, just your dagger and fingers. Which means one bad joke, one spilled drink, or one perceived insult could end in steel. Feasts sometimes turned into drunken duels, and no one batted an eye. Etiquette manuals of the day warned diners not to lick their fingers, not to pick their teeth with knives, and for God's sake, not to blow their nose into the tablecloth. But those same manuals also reminded you to not stab your host, which tells you how often that particular mistake happened. Even the seating chart could kill you. Sitting above your station was an insult. Sitting too low was humiliation. Every placement, every gesture was a test of your awareness and your worth. Feasts were about hierarchy, about knowing exactly when to speak, when to drink, and when to look down. Because one misplaced glance, one word too bold, and suddenly the laughter goes quiet, the knives stop cutting, and every eye turns to you. So yes, medieval table manners mattered. Not because anyone cared about politeness, but because bad manners could make you dinner in a very different way. 7. Food, faith, and forbidden flesh. You might think eating in the Middle Ages was all about survival, but it was really about salvation. Forget calories or flavor. What mattered most was whether God approved of your dinner. For nearly half the year, you couldn't eat meat. Lent, Advent, Ember Days, Rogation Days. The church calendar was basically a medieval diet plan written by someone who hated joy. No meat, no dairy, no eggs. Which meant no butter, no cheese, no bacon, just a lot of dried fish that tasted like wet parchment. But medieval people were nothing if not imaginative. Beavers, for instance, were reclassified as fish because of their tails. So yes, on Fridays, you could technically eat a beaver and still call yourself holy. Puffins, otters, and barnacle geese also made the fish list, and then actually be grafted. Apparently, feathers and fur didn't matter when theology got hungry. Monks bent the rules too. Some claimed that drinking meat broth didn't count as eating meat. Others argued that unborn animals didn't count either. It was less about piety and more about creative accounting for sin. And if you were rich, fasting didn't mean starving. It meant swapping your roast boar for pike and almond milk or salmon glazed with imported spices. The poor, meanwhile, chewed stale rye bread and hoped their turnips didn't taste like dirt. On fast days, the entire town stank of fish, salted, dried, or pickled beyond recognition. By mid-Lent, the smell could knock over a donkey. But the church said, the more you suffered at supper, the cleaner your soul. So, people obeyed. They endured. They prayed with one hand and salted fish with the other. Because in the medieval kitchen, every bite was a moral choice, and salvation was only one bad fish away. 8. When rats were invited to dinner. Let's say you've been invited into a medieval kitchen. Don't stay long. You'd regret it before you even hit the doorframe. The smell hits first, a choking mix of smoke, sweat, grease, and something vaguely alive. The floor isn't stone anymore. It's a slick stew of bones, straw, and spilled ale. Rats scurry across the bread racks like they own the place. Dogs snap at scraps under the tables. Chickens wander through the ashes, pecking at anything soft. The cooks? They're barefoot, sweating and swearing. There's no soap in sight. A cook might taste the stew with his fingers, not approvingly, then wipe them on his filthy apron, the same one he used to swat flies. Hygiene, as a concept, won't be invented for another few centuries. Spoiled meat? Just add more spice. Rotten fish? Fry it until the smell gives up. Wine gone sour? Boil it, sweeten it, and call it mulled. If something moves that shouldn't, you can always blame the devil. And you'd eat it anyway. Everyone did, because there was no choice. Refrigeration was fantasy, and fresh meant hasn't killed anyone yet. The result? Every meal was a gamble. You might get lucky and leave the table full, or you might spend the night discovering new forms of pain. Dysentery, salmonella, ergot, poisoning each one a dinner guest nobody invited. Still, the feasts went on. The more lavish the spread, the filthier the kitchen behind it. The rich ate food from gold platters prepared in rooms that would horrify a modern health inspector. The poor? They dreamed of such horrors, because at least it meant you had something to eat. In medieval Europe, the kitchen wasn't the heart of the home. It was the gut, messy, loud, unpredictable, and always one bad smell away from catastrophe. Every meal was a microbial lottery. Win, and you're full. Lose, and you're a corpse by sunrise. 9. The morning after, decay, disease, and regret. When the last song fades and the candles burn out, the real medieval feast begins for everything else that's still alive. You wake up to silence, broken only by the buzzing of flies. The tables are sticky with spilled ale and congealed grease. Bones lie everywhere, gnawed clean by dogs, rats, and the occasional drunk noble still pretending to be conscious. Outside, the streets are worse. Barrels of waste dumped into the gutters, mixed with food scraps and human filth. The morning air smells like regret. You can almost taste the rot. Servants stagger through the wreckage, sweeping bones into piles, scraping plates, and fighting off stray animals. Whatever's left is either fed to pigs or tossed into the moat, which, conveniently, doubles as both sewer and trash pit. But the feast doesn't really end. The waste seeps into wells. Rats feast on the remains. Disease spreads faster than gossip in the market square. One man's celebration becomes another man's funeral pyre. Still, peasants come by at dawn, poking through the leftovers. Maybe they find a crust of bread, a half-gnawed rib, a handful of soggy grains. Hunger is stronger than disgust, and the line between surviving and dying has never been thinner. Historians like to say the Middle Ages were a cycle of life and death, but here it's simpler. Feasts were cycles of excess and decay. What the rich consumed in one night, the poor consumed in desperation the next morning. And yet, the pattern never changed. Lords feasted again, servants cleaned again, the plague crept closer, and the same dishes were served in the same halls, under the same flickering torches like history itself refusing to digest. As the sun rises over the stench of yesterday's glory, you realize something. In the Middle Ages, everyone feasted, but only a few survived the meal. Subscribe now, because history doesn't just repeat itself. It rots, revives, and feasts again.